There's also a faction, a much bigger faction, much more powerful, that wants to distract from all the failures of the Trump administration, the economic failures of the Trump administration, the war, losing a war in Iran we shouldn't have been in to begin with, the billions and billions and billions of dollars we're spending, an economic and deficit issue, I might add. So there's deliberate weaponization, there's derangement, and there is trying to divert attention 96 days out from an election.
Today I'm joined by Tomas Philipson. He's an economist at the University of Chicago and former economic advisor to Donald Trump during his first term. Also joining us, Celinda Lake, pollster and political strategist for the Democratic Party. You're both very welcome, and thanks for being with us this Sunday afternoon.
Thanks for having us.
Not at all. Let's talk about Anthony Fauci if we can. Career civil servant, spent 38 years at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Declined to answer questions from a Senate committee this week more than 100 times.
What day of the week is it today?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color tie are you wearing?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color is the carpet in front of you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment.
And on it went like a scene from Hoffa. The Republican-led hearing was convened to scrutinise Fauci's management of the pandemic and the origins of COVID. Committee Chairman Senator Rand Paul has long accused Fauci of trying to cover up the origin of the pandemic and of funding research at a lab in Wuhan in China, where some theories say that the pandemic began. Fauci denies any wrongdoing. Well, today, Louisiana Attorney General Liz Murrill said that her office will investigate Dr. Fauci days after he invoked his Fifth Amendment right during the contentious hearing. Was this hearing necessary or just a form for recrimination by Republican senators? Let me put that to you, Tomas, for starters, please.
Well, I think I want to separate two things which have bothered a lot of people with the epidemic, sort of how it was managed, both under Trump and also Biden. One is a policy issue that Fauci and others were essentially too strict in trying to curb back the pandemic. And I think that's a professional flaw, not Fauci's flaw. He comes from a profession that only stares at disease numbers, essentially, and thinks of prevention as being costless when the pandemic or any other disease has two costs. One is prevention, which is dominated essentially the world with GDP growth being hampered or reduced essentially, and one is the actual disease itself. And the public health officials only stare at the disease and therefore come to strange conclusions, which I think was the what upset a lot of the public in the U.S. The second issue is, of course, the misleading nature of Fauci, which is unique to himself, not his profession, or maybe others in the profession cooperated. And there, I think it's very, very troublesome that he's not now taking the time to essentially explain his conflicting private thoughts that came out through his diary that was released, and his public stance, which basically labeled people, conspiracy theorists if they were disagreeing with him, and where he actively tried to shut down people with opposing positions, such as people that came out of the economics camp like myself, and also Jay Bhattacharya, which is now currently the new NIH director.
Okay, Celinda, the hearings this week were really quite something, arguably political theatre. But Dr. Fauci, people will well remember, he became an international figure of interest. I remember well interviewing him himself on Irish television down the line. And such was his fame or notoriety, whatever you want to call it, deeply respected by most people. And yet here he was during the week there was one fellow was kind of cursing at him quite rudely, I would have thought. But it certainly wasn't a dignified hearing.
Well, the problem goes beyond the hearing, which was just absolutely political theater at its worst. The problem goes that there are all kinds of death threats, that this has become symbolic warfare for the extreme MAGA faction, that Fauci's family is threatened, and this is not about figuring out what happened with COVID or what would be a better way to proceed, not from an administration that has cut the Center for Disease Control's cut public health money, taken away health care from millions of Americans. It's a joke that this is anything about really dealing with healthcare and public health care in the future, where Dr. Fauci's thoughts and opinion would be invaluable.
Yeah.
So I think he had to resort to just saying, and now you have 50 states with the ability to pursue Dr. Fauci. This is absurd. And I think the American public's very frustrated with it. They want to know, why don't you do something about gas prices? Why don't you do something about utility rates? Why don't you restore the health care? Why don't you get out of Iran?
Yeah. And at the same time, Celinda, I suppose, like after any catastrophe in a country, or indeed in this case in the world, but let's just stick with America, people like to kind of talk it through. What happened? Where do we go wrong? And I think this was would appear to me a huge opportunity missed, regardless of the rights or wrong of Dr. Fauci's decision making. We got no insight due to the weaponized politicization of events during the week.
Absolutely. I mean, I would love to see a process that's an independent process that includes Democrats and Republicans, and that includes people who are in public health, includes economists like my co-speaker, include of all persuasions. And let's talk about, what do we need to invest in? How do we avoid this in the future? How do we work with people? What should we be investing in terms of scientific research? But all of that's off the table. They just want to hammer Dr. Fauci in a very threatening, dangerous, and political way.
Tomas, hammer, dangerous political way.
Yeah, I think what is ultimately the goal here of Senator Paul is to get the truth out, what happened, essentially. I don't think he's being vindictive. I don't think Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward at Washington Post were different when they try to go after what happened at Watergate. It's a very tenuous process. You want to get the truth out. It's the same as Democrats and also the mainstream media has been obsessed with going after Trump. Hasn't been pretty either. So basically, whenever you want to get the truth out of people who are not forthcoming, you're going to have to drag it out. And unfortunately, I think even though he refused to cooperate on providing any information about thoughts of where this came from. It killed more than 1 million Americans, and people want to understand, how do we avoid this in the future, and how do we set up guidelines now at NIH, which is being done, to avoid this gain of function research to actually have another catastrophe.
So,
by the way,
yes.
A lot of Americans think 10 million people could have been killed if it hadn't been for Dr. Fauci. So I wish we had some process, and the whole political system is weaponized, that we could have a decent conversation. And maybe we would offer, rather than pursuing Dr. Fauci with death threats, with suits, with jail time, why not offer somebody who was a great public servant immunity, and then let's have a real conversation, and let's have people from all points of view. I agree economists should be part of this conversation.
Well, Tomas, would you agree with that? Maybe a little, some class of an offer of immunity so that Dr. Fauci could tell us everything that we need to know for future reference?
Why would you need to pardon a person unless they've done something illegal? Okay, so why can't he speak freely? I mean, he has a pardon, so he's already pardoned, essentially. He can speak freely if he wants to. And the point that we need to be careful with these people, because you need to give them immunity. It's just admitting that there was something wrong. Why do you need, if he didn't do anything wrong? Obviously he did. He misled a lot of people about the origin. And when I said the 1 million people, that was because the virus escaped from the lab, essentially, it looks like. If that's the case, we don't have certainty on that, but everything is pointing in that direction. Even government agencies now saying that. And if that's the case, then this was a mistake by NIH funding going into that lab. And if you can't be forthright about that, we can't learn how to prevent it in the future.
Celinda, could it be that there's a selection of the American political class, if you like, who are suffering from Fauci derangement syndrome, that they're misunderstanding the other side of the argument?
I think there are two things that are going on. There's definitely a faction that is suffering from Fauci derangement syndrome. I'm going to steal those words in the future. There's also a faction, a much bigger faction, much more powerful, that wants to distract from all the failures of the Trump administration, the economic failures of the Trump administration, the losing a war in Iran we shouldn't have been in to begin with, the billions and billions and billions of dollars we're spending, an economic and deficit issue, I might add. So there's deliberate weaponization, there's derangement, and there is trying to divert attention 96 days out from an election.
A listener says this Fauci conversation is an utter joke. Do you guys not remember people being shamed as conspiracy nuts for saying exactly what we now know Fauci believed in private? Celinda.
Well, I don't know what Fauci believed in private. We have some evidence from the diaries, but I don't know what he believed. The way I see it, this was completely unknown. We did not know what was going on. There were lots of actors bipartisanly who worked to do the best. And Fauci is, I think, a national and international hero. It doesn't mean he didn't make mistakes, but I think it could have been 10 million Americans or more died. And I'm very grateful that we had Fauci in charge of this effort.
It's a tale of two Faucis. Celinda says he's a national and international hero. Tomas, you think what?
I think it's as a product of his profession, which is a very misguided profession that don't understand trade-offs with disease mitigation, essentially. So suppose we take highway mortality. We don't close highways to avoid highway mortality. There's a risk trade-off between transportation and health, essentially. And people in public health, including Fauci, but most of the profession, don't understand those trade-offs. They can't quantify those trade-offs. And therefore, their policies lead to very, very harmful effects, which was clearly the case with the shutdowns they did of the economy. Most people believe that, not necessarily the upper class, because they could still be on the computer, but the lower class would be severely damaged, and the kids were severely damaged by the school closures.
Okay, we're going to park the Fauci element of our conversation there, if you don't mind. We're going to ask about support for Israel and the schism in the Democrats. We'll get there in a second. Stay with us, Tomas and Celinda. Thank you.
Ryan Tubridy on Times Radio.
You're most welcome back. We're still joined by Celinda Lake, pollster and political strategist for the Democrats, and Thomas Philipson is an economist at the University of Chicago, former economic advisor to Donald Trump during his first term. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited Washington, D.C. this week to attend the funeral of the late South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, or Graham as they call him in stateside. Netanyahu used the opportunity to meet with President Trump to solidify U.S. support for Israel's military aims in Iran and Lebanon. But while Netanyahu and Trump might appear to be on solid ground, support for Israel is much more contentious within the Democratic ranks. A key U.S. Senate race in Michigan has turned the into a referendum, essentially, on the Democratic Party's once unwavering support for the long-time U.S. ally Pro-Palestinian progressives have recently won in New York, New Jersey, Colorado, Pennsylvania and Illinois. But this could also render pro-Israel Democrats politically orphaned. So here's our question. I'll put this to you, Thomas, first of all. Do you think support for Israel-Palestine is going to be the issue that splits the Democrats in the midterms and causing them all sorts of problems?
Well, it used to be a bipartisan position that a country that wants death to America we should try to avoid them having nuclear power, which is the goal of all this, of this, obviously, in stopping Iran, which I kind of equate with the Hamas issue with Israel, essentially. If it was a country that says death to the UK, you probably would be a little bit more interested in that as well. But so that's where we are at now, where the Democrats don't agree to that currently, and they're hemorrhaging Jewish votes and with the Hamas-Israel conflict, essentially, quite dramatically. And in general, the DSA, the socialist wing of the Democratic Party, is sitting very, very unfavorably with independents, which is obviously the swing voters that determine things. And the election, the midterm election that's coming up, I think would have gone probably in the Democrats' favor, but now they're putting in a position with the DSA pulling them away from the mainstream, both on Israel or immigration, on reforming the Supreme Court, of defunding the police and opening up the jails, etc., that they are basically making this midterm election a lot closer than it otherwise would be with these kind of what I view very irrational views on how to run a society.
Celinda, how do you feel about what Thomas is saying, and are you concerned looking at the polls?
Well, first of all, I would say that the Iran war was started by two leaders, Donald Trump and Netanyahu, trying to save themselves. They're both in serious electoral trouble, and this is a wag the dog type strategy to divert people's attention from the economy and the failures and the disregard for the Constitution in both countries. There are a lot of people, including a lot of Jewish voters, who believe if you are pro-Israel, then you are anti the Iran war and you are anti-Netanyahu. He's not good for our country and he's not good for Israel. The Democrats are very solidified. The elites in the Democrats may be divided, but the voters in the Democrats are not divided. They despise Netanyahu, and they believe that what has happened in Gaza is an atrocity and should be stopped. And it has gone way too far, way too long. I think, though, that what's really going on here, and in the Michigan race being a characterization of this, it's about big corporate Trump donors, AIPAC donors, wealthy donors trying to control our political system. And you have 63 million being spent against 7 million. And probably the candidate with 7 million is going to win.
Yeah, you had Sam Lauter, for example, a founding member of the Democratic Majority for Israel, saying there's a high level of discomfort in the Jewish community. Do you worry about alienating Jewish Democrats?
Well, I worry about a third of Democrats are socialists, so I worry about alienating socialist Democrats. Yeah. I worry about alienating young people in the Democratic Party who are united, and I worry about alienating Jewish voters.
So therein lies the schism. Therein lies your problem.
Maybe it's a problem, or maybe Donald Trump completely unites Democrats.
Is sufficiently to make a massive impact at the midterms, or insufficiently enough to cause damage thanks to the schism as explained or outlined?
I mean, the most recent polls right now show Abdul El-Sayed stronger in the general election than Haley Stevens. So I don't think the and that's because Democrats are so much more enthusiastic about Abdul. So I don't think this is a major schism. There may be a race or two where it plays out. There will be plenty of races where the energy of young people will determine the outcome, and they are completely united in their view. And
Thomas, how do you feel the Republicans are feeling at this point out? We're not a million miles away from the midterms. Is the tail up, or are you feeling you've an uphill battle to fight?
Well, I think that it's getting evened out by the socialists coming in the limelight. I mean, Mondami is the best real estate agent for Florida you can think of, essentially. So many rich people are now leaving New York that I live in Florida that we see, housing prices go up quite dramatically. So I think the we get to see of these people and what they actually believe is adequate policy, the higher, the better the future looks for in the midterms for Republicans, in my view.
Okay, I'm going to go briefly into FIFA, if that's okay, because it's such a big story. And after the World Cup happened in you're smiling already, Celinda. After the World Cup happened in your part of the world, let's get some thoughts on this. Gianni Infantino, who's still in the job, facing a rebellion from members of the FIFA Council who are attempting to force an extraordinary general meeting that could develop into a full-blown leadership challenge. Many FIFA insiders would still see a path to survival for Infantino, despite the outcry over his World Cup sell-off plans. If it wasn't for the close association with the Trump empire, arguably, Trump has said he did not speak to Gianni Infantino about FIFA's hugely controversial plan to sell stakes in a new company that would operate the World Cup. But the plan was backed by the investment fund of Joshua Kushner, who is the lesser-known brother of Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Thomas, I'll come to you on this. What do you think? Is there an issue with an associate of Donald Trump's being involved in this deal? Because he's never too far from a deal.
I don't know if Donald Trump is involved. I know his family's involved, or his relatives are involved. Mm-hmm. But in general, I think private market discipline for this organization by having private investors would be a good thing. We have a lot of sports in the U.S. that's run by investors, private investors, and those sports have grown dramatically, and fans like it. In fact, I think the investors are better at catering to fans because, they want the ticket sales, they want the advertising sales, and that only comes from when the fans are interested, essentially. And so I think in general, I think this would be a positive movement. I think it was a reaction to the particular private parties involved in this deal.
Celinda, are we watching this with great interest?
I am watching it with great interest. And I love the teams that were in the United States. We're all Norwegian fans now and Scottish fans. But I will say this. I think that what's happened is, I think this is something we can agree on. It's the actors that are involved that is really distorting this argument. It's about profiteering. And a lot of people want to see, if soccer develops in the United States, we want to see more community involvement. We want to see less profiteering. The governor of New Jersey, who hosted the final match, was very, very critical of the profiteering of FIFA. So I don't see where selling it to private investors is going to make that situation better.
Okay. Well, look, fascinating take on all of that. I wonder, is it possible to ask you both in a word or two to tell us who you believe is living the American dream? We don't have a heap of time, but Thomas, who's living the American dream this week?
Well, I'm a free market guy, so I'm a big fan of the prediction market founders, which are taking off in the U.S. I know Tarek Mansour of Kalshi pretty well. I knew him about 5 years ago when he started as an enterprise, and I think it's fantastic what they're doing. Okay,
that was a quick answer and on brand, if I may say so. Celinda, who's living the American dream this week?
Well, I'm going to be on brand too and tell you that 85% of working Americans are not living the American dream, and that's why Democrats are going to win in November.
Okay, true to the brand. Well, we certainly got covered both sides of the political spectrum there. Thank you both very much indeed. Celinda Lake, pollster and political strategist for the Democrats, and Thomas Philipson, economist, I should say, at the University of Chicago and former economic advisor to Donald Trump during his first term.